We'll be right back.
It's going to be awesome.
It's going to be good. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. This is another fun and interesting, hopefully, edition of What the Sustainable News, talking
That's a
about
lot of
Japan's
pressure.
news. Yeah. We'll do our best. Japan's news and how it intersects with sustainability issues. Thanks so much for joining, Hiko!
I made it. I made it. Yes.
Yay!
Nice to be back on.
It's so nice to have you. I know you're super busy. Thanks for joining. This is fun.
Yeah, yeah. No, and there's a ton of stuff going on in Japan lately. So that's actually, I mean, first of all, I was most bummed out about not making it to join you last time, but I was second most bummed out about that. There was so much to actually talk about.
It's a
And
lot.
I love having
Yeah.
an hour just to focus on this stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm gonna show some pictures from the topics which I think we're talking about, which you also touched on your Tokyo Tonight show. Yeah?
I did indeed. Yes.
Yeah. So you do
I
that
don't,
every Sunday? Respect. Every
every,
Sunday night for many, many years, right?
yeah. I've tried to hold on as much as possible. Most weeks in the year, it's 10:30 p.m. Japan Standard Time every Sunday night. Yes, indeed.
Wow, awesome. I would like to start with a topic that you brought up on Tokyo Tonight. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right. The Whopper, the Burger
The Whopper.
King plant-based Whopper. So
Yeah.
this is something, I mean, you brought it up on your Tokyo show, and it's something that people are all asking me because actually it's not for vegans. If
Yeah.
you're a strict vegan or even a vegetarian, you're probably not gonna be that interested in it. But it's aimed at flexitarians. Have you ever heard of flexitarian? Yeah?
By my reaction, possibly I can't keep up. I mean, they're all good.
No, no, but this
I
is
endorse all kinds of diet
no,
flexibility,
no, no,
but no,
no.
that's a new one to me.
Yeah, no, flexitarian is something that
Flexitarian.
started, I think, from the UK, but
Yeah.
because Japan gets a lot of people from the UK who are trying to reduce their meat intake. So they're not vegetarians, they're not vegans,
I've
but they're
heard
trying to
pescatarian
choose,
of
no, they're just trying to reduce their meat intake. So
yeah.
sometimes they will eat fish, sometimes they will eat meat, but they're trying to have more meals that don't have meat or fish because of the environmental impact. So they're
Yeah.
called flexitarians. So Guardian UK had a
Ah,
big article talking about how actually this is aimed at flexitarians because it's cooked on the same grill
yeah.
with
Oh,
meat
yeah.
and right. So if you're a
Right.
strict vegetarian or vegan, you're not going to be. This is
Right.
not for you, right? This is
Right.
to help people reduce for health reasons or environmental reasons. But I'm really happy it's in Japan. It's
Yeah.
great that you're seeing more options for sure.
And and while I'm definitely not a card-carrying flexitarian, I mean, one great thing about Japan is I you can sit down and have a great meal and you'll just notice at the end, hey, you know what? I don't think there was any meat. And honestly, this being Japan, it will never meet vegan criteria. There'll always be something in the dashi or the dressing or something. But you can have quite enjoyable meals here with excellent organic veggies or whatever. And quite enjoyable. Coming from New Zealand where like meat is like rice, where I grew up. But I come here and I don't miss it. I can go through meals and not miss it. And I'm definitely I laugh hearing the word flexitarian because that just sounds to me like someone just not being mindful about not eating too much junk food or something. But yeah,
Well,
that's
it's actually a term that we use a lot in tourism consulting with Japanese business owners because
yeah,
they're really confused by how someone could choose a meat dish or a fish dish and then somewhere else not want meat or fish. They want only vegan or vegetarian. So
yeah,
that increases the market already coming in.
I
You've
see.
got 10% of inbound travelers 10% are already vegan vegetarian. So add flexitarians, you're talking 15%, maybe even 20% of all people coming in are going to want more choices which are plant-based. So this is a big hurdle for Japanese restaurants and eateries. Tokyo, you guys have options, but around Japan, other places, this is a big hurdle, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm recoiling probably partly from just middle age as well. Maybe it's inflexibility, because this is a thing. Everywhere you go in Japan, there's always a vegetarian. Like the idea that you need to designate that I need to be flexible. I don't understand what that means, honestly, but it's great. Empower to them, and maybe that is what I am, and I just don't realize it, because I'm excited about having an Impossible Burger, and I've seen the test where they actually buy something a vegan can never do, right? They buy a normal Whopper and the veggie Whopper, and they eat them both, and they say, and I've seen the reviews that say they taste almost the same, and that's interesting. If it's healthy, great, you know.
And my dad has had a heart condition, so he's had to really reduce his meat. So for him, who loves the taste of meat and it's so hard to give up, this is a great option, because his doctor has told him, don't eat any more meat. You're going to have another heart attack. But there is a really growing market. For example, I was talking to Wagyu beef restaurant the other day, and they were like, oh, Wagyu, everybody wants to eat Wagyu. And I was like, you know what? That's true. But inside the groups of people who are traveling around Japan, there's probably one person who does not eat meat. And so you should, even at a Wagyu restaurant, you should have one option, which is plant-based, right? And then the group can all come and eat together, because the group is not going to be happy to come if one person can't eat anything, right?
And we're so spoiled in Tokyo. That's true as well. So yeah, and you know, there's always options here, whereas I realize it's different when you're perhaps traveling. But yeah, I mean, and from the health perspective as well, well, from my perspective, while it's cool, I think we've talked about this before, where I don't fully understand the need for people who ethically avoid meat to eat fake meat. You know, especially when I've discovered how delicious, and I didn't know this until I got here, how delicious aubergines are, or how delicious, you know, like when you do them right. And I'd quite happily have a hamburger with that in the middle, right? Like, make it out of good veggies. Why do you need to make, you know, lab created tofu-based meat? Tofu tastes great. Why convert it into something that doesn't look like tofu? But if it works, and look, I'm curious to try it, and maybe it'll be something I'll get hooked on. It is good to have the choice, but I'm still a little bit baffled by why people need fake meat.
No, yeah. I mean, it's part of the hurdle. It's part of the adjustment. It's giving up your habits, right?
Yeah.
So I was talking to a Shojin-ryori chef the other day, and he was saying Shojin-ryori is a really big hurdle for people, even vegans, even vegetarians. You have to be ready to experience raw vegetables in a new way that doesn't have the hit of sugar and salt like we're so used to. So he's like, the best way is the day before a Shojin-ryori meal, don't eat anything with sugar and salt or sauces, which is such a big hurdle. But then he said, then you would really savor the vegetable, not just the vegetable taste, but how does the carrot taste that day? Like that, you know, deep level of understanding of vegetables. So, even for vegans, that's a hurdle.
Well, like what I experienced with my palate detoxing when I came to Japan, I didn't find the sweets here very good. So I just ended up going cold turkey because I couldn't find anything that I liked. And it was after a few months I realized that all of this food that I tried before that I didn't like, all of a sudden tasted wonderful to me. Like my palate completely changed in a few months of being in Japan, and I couldn't go back. And I grew up eating so much processed sugars and salts and so on, just as you do living in Australia and New Zealand. So I totally get that.
Absolutely. It's all like you have to detox your taste buds, right? Like it's absolutely that way. Tokyo Sam has joined, says, Hiko, you look very flexible.
I try to be flexible. Thank you.
All right. Do you want to talk about one of your topics? That was mine. Your turn.
Okay. Wow. So because I've got so much to catch up on, I kind of thematically linked my suggestions. I do realize I've been talking a lot about, I'm self-conscious about how much I've been talking about hydrogen, but it's not me. It's just all the news lately is just talking nonstop about that. So maybe before getting into that, the three big announcements, Japanese government announcements, there have been three really big ones. The first one is the government's pledged to go carbon neutral by 2050, which seems a long way away, but it's also a massive goal, especially for a huge energy consuming. So that was the first thing. Then they followed it up a couple of weeks later with an announcement that by the mid-2030s, the central government is pledging to end sales of all gasoline-only cars in Japan. So i.e., all cars will become hybrid or electric. Or who knows, maybe they'll have pneumatic or something else by then, but they won't be burning gasoline combustion engines. And then Tokyo thought, well, anything they can do, we can do better. We're going to get rid of all gasoline burning cars by 2030. And I talked a bit on Tokyo Tonight about the car thing, how some people said by 2030, isn't that a bit ambitious? But one thing about Japan that makes that feasible, more feasible than in other places, is the car registration system is stacked to basically make it uneconomic to own a car for really more than 7 years. The registration price goes up as the car goes older to force people to buy new cars. It's how they've sustained the car industry in Japan. So it kind of works in favor of converting over the entire economy of cars that if they've got, 10 years from now, they've actually got 3 years to plan to release their first cars, to be able to switch the whole country over. So I think it's actually quite achievable. And just on the side of that as well, Toyota has made two really exciting announcements. The one you'd probably be into as a Tesla owner. Everyone in America is so, and Tesla's taken such a great lead on this, but they've kind of done what you need to do in the absence of government support, which is rather than doing anything based on government changing the infrastructure of the country, they've just taken what's there and they've put the best technology out there and they've just run with it. Where Japan's been kind of sitting around waiting for all the infrastructure to change and to retool from gasoline to hydrogen, which, on a 50-year plan, Tesla's just said, no, let's just plug it and charge it. And they've run with it. And they've got these amazing cars going out. And Toyota's been focused on fuel cell vehicles for a long time. But they've just announced the other day that, okay, they've looked at they've looked at electric car batteries and they're behind, but they think that they can release a car with a 500-mile range and a 10-minute charge time. And they're going to be releasing it soon. And if sounds like marketing, but it is Toyota. They're very good at engineering stuff. And if they've figured out how to make an electric car that can charge in 10 minutes and go 500 miles, that's pretty interesting. Yeah. And at the same time, they also announced and updated a much better looking version of their fuel cell car, which again, it's not clear. You can drive 400 miles. The problem is 400 miles away, there probably isn't a refueling station. That's the part that needs to come up. But I think it is still exciting that that long term, I do think that is the better long-term total economy solution, is getting rid of all the gas stations and replacing them with portable, high-density energy fuel like hydrogen, or maybe it's going to be something else. But short-term, the fact that people are realizing, okay, let's do batteries now is really cool. So, yeah. Oh, and around the 2050 zero carbon emission, net zero carbon. So they're going to take into account all the mechanisms like carbon trading, sequestering, all the sort of levers that you can pull. But yeah, the government's serious about it. They've announced a $19 billion fund for renewable energy investments. They've announced a 10% tax break on companies that invest in green tech. So they really are going crazy. And a lot of this is is for changing infrastructure. A lot of it's for investing in renewable energy. But all of a sudden, yeah, the government's just come bursting out of the blocks with all of these initiatives. And now they're in Paris on the new climate change negotiations. And they're saying, hey, everyone, we're doing all this stuff. And it's nice. It's the first time I've seen this kind of movement on these issues. We should have been doing this for 20 years nonstop.
Yes, absolutely. And it's so nice to see the enthusiasm and the momentum starting. Absolutely. Yeah. Dan H has joined from YouTube. Thanks for joining, Dan. He says, currently in the United Kingdom, lots of businesses are buying electric cars because of commitment policy allowing you to use it as a tax write-off. Wow. And Johnny Rowe also joined us. Thanks, Johnny. He says, found your channel today. Love all the great informative content. Moving to Japan in a few months, finding everything I need from your discussions. Awesome, Johnny. Thanks for joining.
Lots of good information here.
And before we do the next news, I think we have a guest who's coming on.
Could it be?
Let's see if I can get him. Uh-oh. Did I get rid of? Oh, no.
Hey,
how are you?
Hi, how are you?
I was just going to do a summary, but it's so much better if you can introduce it yourself.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, awesome. Well, tell us about your article, which was the boycott for the Uniqlo shop in Korea, and you were talking about how this has some historical significance. Give us a summary. I've
My,
got some screenshots for you. Yeah.
my article, my tweet storm. Now tweets are becoming news. As you might have noticed, Korea and China have been kind of locked in a trade war with this boycott from the South Korean side going on since 2019. And there were a lot of things leading up to it and a lot of things after it. But it's still going on very much so in Korea, where they are trying as much as possible to stay away from Japanese products. And it's working very well for things like cars or apparel or foods, for which there is a analog to that thing being produced in Korea. But there is one area where it is not working well at all, and that concerns fantasy products, fantasy delivery devices. So, for instance, Bandai's Tamagotchi recorded record sales there this month. The PlayStation 5 sold out. Nintendo's Animal Crossing has been a huge hit there. So while the South Koreans are very actively avoiding Japanese products that are, that they can purchase on their own in their own country, they are not having such a good job or not being so successful at not consuming of Japanese fantasies. And it's really interesting because this is actually not unique to Korea at all. It happened in America in the 1980s when we were at the peak of our Japan bashing and literally bashing Japanese cars with sledgehammers and radios and computers and all sorts of things. But at the same time, putting literally millions of dollars worth of quarters into Japanese video games. And of course, that's exactly when kids started consuming all sorts of Japanese anime and pop culture. So just goes to show you, you can regulate markets. You can't regulate fantasies.
Yeah, that was wild. And so I was reading up on the link that you had about the boycott in Uniqlo, and it sounds like it started from a commercial, which was kind of a slight on we don't remember what happened 80 years ago, which then was linked by some people to the comfort women issue. And of course, Japan and Korea have this conflict over many years because Japan has never formally apologized about the comfort women. And, but then it sounds like it was also because of an embargo of Japanese products, industrial products to Korea. So it was a little bit more complicated.
The Abe administration shut down sending over of prescribed technologies, computer chips and things like that. But that was in response to another diplomatic thing. Yeah. It's a mess,
Never ending.
Hiko, Matt, you guys know each other?
No, go ahead, Hikosaemon. No, please.
I just wanted to introduce you on screen.
Pleasure to meet you virtually for the first time.
Yes, I always follow you on Twitter and stuff. It's great. So you are a human being. I didn't know if you were just a computer construct.
I think. Yes.
Graphics have gotten so realistic.
They have. No, so what I remember about the Uniqlo in Korea thing. I mean, when it was all going to custard over there, and as happens from time to time, things flare up from year to year, and people stop buying, and it settles down after a couple of months. Everyone sort of gets it out of their systems a little bit, which is a very patronizing way of putting it, and that's exactly how Uniqlo in Korea put it. I think they were caught. Some manager in Korea gave some kind of public statement saying, yeah, this kind of thing always passes over after a couple of months. And I think that was taken as an extra challenge to the Korean consuming public.
They triggered hard mode.
They triggered it. Let's see how long we can hold on to this. And so they caught it. I read that this morning and I remembered immediately, oh yeah, they were the ones talking about who were getting extra criticized for looking at this flippantly, seeing it as something that will pass soon. Yeah. Which it kind of normally does, but it really didn't this time.
Well, it's interesting how much these political spats affect pop culture in the entire region. Yeah. I don't know if you remember. Do you remember the anime Your Name? That was the biggest hit of a couple years back. And it was a giant success in Asia, and partly or largely due to the fact that it sold so many tickets in China. And the reason it sold so many tickets in China was China at the time had banned all South Korean content over a dispute with the a high altitude missile defense system that America had kind of sold them, and they had installed along the borders, and whose radar reached into Chinese territory and was also being fed back to America, which was the whole thing China was mad about.
Well, Matt, like while you're here, so I grew up in New Zealand having some Zainichi Japanese, Korean friends who, or children of, who grew up in New Zealand, and they were telling me they'd bounced back between Korea and New Zealand and Japan during the 1980s. And during that time, there was the full-on culture ban on Japan. And, South Korea was open, but there was actually quite a bit of a wall around the country and the media and so on.
Sure.
And it was funny, my Zainichi friends would talk about how you go into Korea, and on Korean TV or comics, they would have Doraemon.
Yeah.
They would have, and they would basically copy the latest J-pop songs, and they would release them in Korea and pass them off as their own songs and whatever. And it was all kind of, it was kind of open war on that. But what I found really interesting was, in the early 90s when K-pop started to come out, K-pop was clearly just imitating, in Taiwan as well, but clearly just imitating what was coming out of Japan. Isn't it fascinating how K-pop has completely surpassed the parent? They would deny it ever was the parent. They would deny ever that they was copying.
Sure.
But I think the way I look at it, I'm curious what your take is it was clearly heavily influenced by J-pop, but they've just left Japan completely behind, haven't they, in their ambition?
I think that, and deservedly so. South Korean performers are like some of the hardest working people in show business. It's crazy, in ways good and bad. There's been all sorts of scandals about, idols and male and female being overworked and stuff. But, it's much more an open marketplace of ideas there. Whereas in Japan, until very recently, and still now to a large extent, like the entertainment world is controlled by these jimusho, these like offices that like shut down almost any kind of everything has to go through them. They're very difficult to deal with. They'll issue takedown orders if people just put up pictures of idols online and stuff like that. So they really did a great job of smoldering any kind of fan like grassroots activity before it could grow into something bigger. Yeah. And that's why it's a big reason why Japanese, pop music has remained here. And the other one being that Japanese pop music, especially starting around the early 2000s, started to completely center around kind of otaku tastes, and not mainstream ones, like in that post Train Man period where it became okay to be an otaku. Yeah, and suddenly like AKB and these packaged products that had long been seen as kind of fringy and cringy became the mainstream.
Train Man? Train Man is a manga, is it?
So Train Man was a series. It started out as a thread on Ni Channel, which is the precursor of Futaba Channel that gave us 4chan and later, more recently, 8kun and all of these other crazy unregulated online bulletin board systems. But Ni Channel was, or 2channel as it's written in Roman characters, was the precursor of all of those anonymous websites. And there was a thread on there in a forum for guys who couldn't get laid, basically. It was for guys. It was called Dokushin Otoko or something. Like it was written instead of with single men with poison, like doku as in poison instead of doku as in
different from
single.
Train Spotters then? It's not the same
Different
as
from train
Spotters.
spotting, yes.
Okay.
And there was a thread in there about a guy who basically saw a girl on a train and was trying to pick her up and didn't know what to do. And like the whole forum came together and started like Cyrano de Bergerac style started coaching him. And
how to pick up a girl on a train.
Yeah, and he kept like, reporting back with different, updates and things, and they finally got married. And then somebody pulled this all off and turned it into a book.
Wow.
And that was a huge hit in Japan. We're talking 2000, I think it was 3, 4-ish. And then it got turned into a live action TV series, and it was a massive hit, and it was a huge mainstreaming of otaku taste because he was an otaku, this anime, figurine fan. And it really mainstreamed those kind of tastes. And the really ironic thing is nobody knows who he is or if he's even real. And there's a lot of speculation that actually Ni Channel's founder kind of either came up with him or seized on this thread. There's no way to tell who it is. Mm-hmm. They've never been revealed. But the more interesting thing, whether he actually exists or not, is why it resonated with Japan so much. And it did. And after there's literally in Japanese pop culture before and after. In that kind of 2003, 4, or 5 time frame. And it was like the complete otakuization of Japanese mainstream taste from that point on.
So for anybody who's
Wow.
listening who doesn't know MattAlt, he's an expert in Japanese pop culture. He's written books. We've had him on this series before. So I have a question, Matt, to kind of bring back full circle to what you were talking about with the boycott. So do you think that like fantasy and Japanese pop culture can be a way for diplomacy between Japan and Korea?
It's
Japan
tricky.
and US?
It's tricky because so many Japanese pop cultural products are like grassroots hits. The minute the government starts saying something is cool, it isn't, right?
Yeah. Cool
It's like
Japan.
Cool Britannia. Remember Cool Britannia, where like the British government is suddenly saying the Sex Pistols are okay. You know what I mean? It's
yeah.
it's like what? So the whole point of all sorts of fantasy delivery devices, as I call them in my book, is that they kind of sneak into your heart, in spite of it all, right? Nobody like seeks out Hello Kitty. She knocks on your door.
I think in terms of the Korea-Japan relationship, when I was teaching university students, Japanese university female students suddenly changed in about a span of 10 years and had a very positive outlook on what Korea was like. Based
Korean
on
dramas
how
were huge for
popular,
a time.
Korean
that
dramas
was actually kind of
and
that was kind of simultaneous with the Train Man thing. That like kind of
It was that time, wasn't it?
2005 to like 10-ish.
Yeah.
It was huge, and then there was a backlash called the what's it called?
Kikang, hate
That's
Korea.
it. Yeah.
Kikang,
Like hating the Korean wave is what the English word is, and it was kind of largely driven by net rightists and stuff like that. And then with all of the later political happenings that happened, and like literally, it's like tuning into like a new episode of some kind of political drama. Like there was some horrible, like somebody dissed somebody, or there was some incrimination, or like, and it's just, it really feels like there's no solution to this. But it's so entrenched. It makes it all the more interesting when you see things like Tamagotchi or PlayStation 5. Sony is clearly highlighted on these "Don't buy from Japan" like placards and signs that you see around South Korea, like a big red X through it. But there's no getting around the fact that if you want to play the latest video games, you got to get a PlayStation 5. And South Korea is hungry for escape, just like everybody else is in the middle of Corona.
Yeah.
So.
Wow,
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much, Matt. That was an awesome
Thank
little
you. Sorry to
guest
jump
appearance. We
in.
love it. No.
that was awesome.
Fantastic.
Well,
and
I
we'll
look
see you
forward to hearing the rest of this.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much. All right, Hiko, back to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all
You
downhill
got-
from here.
No.
No, it's gonna be great. Well, I'm trying to sign.
Okay, go ahead.
Wow.
So we've talked about EVs. We've talked about the 2050 a little bit. One other of your articles that I thought was really interesting is in the same vein, is about how Suga, Prime Minister Suga, is very interested in the next more futuristic, more sustainable step forward, right? And so he's planning to work with Biden. Now, this is interesting. Since the last time we talked, there's
about
been a bit of American politics happening, right?
I mean,
So green diplomacy. And it's the first time that they've had a chance to even talk about it with the U.S. because the U.S. government is now keen to get back into Paris and keen to think about green technology and stuff. So that's very positive.
they're saying
We don't have to talk too
I don't
much
know.
about
I'm
American
kind
politics.
of I'm a big fan of it. I'm the biggest fan of America. I am. I grew up in a very pro-American household, but I've learned to temper my optimism a little bit, both about America. Of course, America produces all this great stuff, which the world benefits by, whether the government is for it or not. I mean, I would argue that some of the coolest and most exciting environment and renewable and innovations that have happened during this last 4 years, during the most, opposed to it sort of government that you can have. So you don't need to have necessarily, a government support. The fact they put a coal baron in charge of the EPA, just how many crazy things could they do that were, just the complete opposite of logic. And yet, in spite of all of that, in some ways, as a backlash to it, there has been this sort of burst of innovation. On the other hand, as well, I mean, Biden kind of countered the Green New Deal. That's not my, I'm going to do something else and it's going to be awesome. And there's a lot of rhetoric and there's not a lot of clarity. And look, I'm hopeful that anything would be better. Honestly, I'm in that camp. But at the same time, I'm not going to bet my horse or farm or anything on, any certainty. We'll wait and see what happens with America. But certainly they're saying the right things, that they're going to rejoin the the Paris Climate Accord, which is critical. I mean, there's just it's already too late, actually, by most measures. That right now, all the permafrost melting in Canada and Siberia, it's already, the runaway effect is sort of starting, but there's no hope to even pull it back even 100 years from now if we don't do dramatic stuff now. And at least that conversation is restarting.
We've both been in Japan for so long that I remember the Kyoto Protocol as a really big deal, a time when Japan was a leader in terms of moving forward, making green targets. And then over the past 10 years, there just hasn't been that focus or enthusiasm. So it's so nice to see it kind of in the news and in the forefront, making targets. That's the first step, right?
I was in New Zealand completing my law degree in international environmental law, planning to come to Japan when Kyoto Protocol happened. And what happened at that time was 1997. That was when the world had just, for the first time ever, the 1980s ozone treaty on chlorofluorocarbons and hydrofluorocarbons, that they did this treaty banning these substances. And the science was coming out in the 90s that, wow, a global treaty, a diplomatic effort to control emissions of these substances that were linked to the ozone holes had produced an effect that the ozone hole that we were worried in New Zealand was going to cover New Zealand within 20 years had disappeared. And there was so much excitement that, wow, if the world can get together and realize issues that in a single country that you need the entire cooperation of the world to fix on, including China, including India, on not emitting these sprays, that you could fix this. So there was all of this excitement at realizing, wow, they had fixed the ozone hole based on a treaty. And that was right at the time that the science was coming out. Oh, these other emissions are going to do something even worse than the ozone hole. And there was all this enthusiasm going into Kyoto that we can fix it. And that enthusiasm was still riding pretty high, I would say, certainly when I got here, probably until the early 2000s. But then this whole sort of, people got fatigued from it, perhaps. There was a political backlash against it. There was this idea, why do we have to do it if they don't have to do it? And all of the political will just seemed to collapse in the early 2000s. And it just never came back. And it never came back even under liberal governments, in America and elsewhere.
Yeah.
And it's kind of... Yeah, it's this thing. Are we the frogs in the pot that we know it's happening, but we just can't? Is the commitment too long and too big? The HFC thing only took 10 years to show a result, but this requires a bigger, longer commitment, and maybe even knowing what it's doing to us, we can't do it. That's the feeling it got into. So it's so great to see that shift happening now.
Definitely.
But I hope it's not it's got to be long term. It can't just be a PR thing. And I'm not sure it is yet.
Yeah, another connected thing, which you had in the Flipboard, was the 2025 Expo in Osaka to showcase green tech and clean tech. And then that reminded me of a tweet I did the other day, which is from a UN think tank person, showing what a home might look like in 2030 after COVID. And we had a really interesting discussion on Twitter because, for example, you go in the toilet and the toilet analyzes how healthy your diet is. You look in the mirror and it tells you your BMI. And so a few people were writing like, no way do I want that much information, and then the whole privacy issue comes up. Like, a smart home, that seems like a great idea. But then if it's hacked and you have no privacy whatsoever, your whole data about even internal things is not private anymore. But
Yeah.
that was really interesting. And then that whole, so I expect by 2025 at this expo, we're going to see a lot of stuff like that, the smart homes, right?
Mm.
So what I would
Well,
hope for is we see
yeah.
more efficiency, like energy efficiency, insulation in houses in Japan by 2025. That would
Yeah.
be nice.
Isn't that's another one of the paradoxes in this country that people know about the fax machine and they always say the high tech country that still uses faxes for everything. But to me, the insulation thing is actually an even bigger and more damaging paradox than the faxing. Japan is like one of the challenges Japan has with the Kyoto Protocol targets and the Paris Accord targets is that it's starting from a baseline of being so energy efficient. During the oil shock, having no domestic energy sources, Japan just doubled down, made everything 25%, more efficient or whatever. The energy used per emission in Japan has always been low because they invested in having tiny engines in cars and squeezing this out. And yet it never occurred to them that they could just put insulation into the walls of buildings and save so much. And even now, I've got foreign friends. I have a friend who lives in Kyoto, and she talked about how they paid a renovation company to put insulation into the house. And they were a dodgy contractor, and they went up and they found them all still rolled up, basically tossed into the attic. They didn't even put them out. And it's just, well, what's wrong? Like, why? And I'm sure it's apart from the fact that these were obviously sort of scamsters, it was also just not the practice, right? It's just not how people make houses, and it's baffling, isn't it? People spend so
That's
much on heating
crazy.
and air conditioning,
Yeah.
and the climate's so extreme, and you just have to put pink fiberglass bats or the eco-friendly improved equivalent of it in the walls, and you can save so
Yeah.
much. I don't get it.
What
Yeah,
we
that's a huge
found,
one.
and I think a lot of people find when they remodel old houses, is you have
Mm,
to update the windows. The windows are
yeah,
the
double glazed.
biggest
Yeah,
loss,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So even if you can't afford double glaze, which is quite expensive in Japan, what you can do, which is kind of a cheap alternative, which works really well, is if you have the deep old windows with the
yeah.
old glass, you can get another window put and there's a space in between.
Mm,
And so we did that on our house. It's much cheaper than double glazing and it works really well. And then you can
yeah.
put plants in between so it like looks pretty as well.
Okay, well, that's pretty
Nice
cool.
option. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I saw that thing as well. That's right. The 2025 Osaka Expo. It kind of always makes sense for Japan to go for. I mean, Japan's whole economic miracle from in a way, the oil shock kind of launched Japan. All of a sudden, the things that Japan made sense after the oil shock, right? The fact that they made the smaller cars and the energy efficient radios, and all of a sudden, all of that made sense. And it's been Japan's strength for a long time, and it still is in a way.
Yeah.
I do. Um, I think I mentioned this last night, but I think what's happening with the hydrogen thing as well, the fact that it needs government support to work and that the Japanese government's now doubling down on it, I really think this is going to be like the iMode phone. It's going to be a case where Japan is sort of going to leapfrog ahead a generation, of technology, and everyone's kind of looking at it a bit funny now. But I think you're going to find by 2030, after all of this, and you're going to see this get showcased at the expo, everyone's going to be coming to Japan and seeing everything's hydrogen power stations everywhere, and they're going to be saying, wow, we are 10 years behind, which they were saying before the iPhone came out in Japan. When I got to Japan, Japanese phones were like the biggest thing to show off. And I'm pretty sure that if it goes well, the energy infrastructure in Japan could well be the equivalent of that, 10 years, even within 10 years from now. But yeah, so I'm excited. It's weird to suddenly be excited about that, and they're not just going to be rolling out energy efficient cars. But as always in Japan, there are always paradoxes and contradictions, and yeah, that's a really big
Yeah.
one.
I think one of the big arguments for hydrogen, of course, is the loss of power as you make it and then you transfer it and then you use it and how the car is using it. The loss of energy along the way is a big
Yeah,
hurdle. Plus, how the hydrogen is made using electricity.
yeah.
If you're making it using coal, that's not good. We need to think about green
Well,
technologies for how
it's a
it's
good
made as
it's a
well,
good
right?
compromise. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
But
It
it's
it
amazing technology. And if they get it to work,
yeah.
and they make
I
it
mean,
from green sources, it could be great.
I mean, it's funny. It was kind of an epiphany learning the green, blue, gray thing, and that being an understood term. Yeah, you can make actually dirty hydrogen. You can make hydrogen that is just as bad as burning literally coal, because you can extract it as a hydrocarbon, but by burning off all the carbon around it, and it's just which is a terrible thing. But however, you can do in green hydrogen, which is what we'd like everyone to do, is just to put electrodes into the ocean and generate straight out of the water, from windmills generating the power. That's the ideal, but it's just not very economic right now. But
Plus,
the
you have
blue
to
thing,
transfer it somewhere, right? For the charging
yeah,
station, usually.
yeah. But if you can extract it, if you can get, well, it's not very efficient right now. That's where obviously you want it all to go, and that's why the government is putting out $19 billion of subsidies for improving those technologies. But what can happen right now is all of those ships that carry gas and oil and all of those countries that produce gas and oil, yeah, they're still going to be digging holes in the ground, but you can, if you put enough technology around to sequester and separate the carbon from the hydrogen and the hydrocarbons, and instead of putting gasoline and coal and LNG into ships, you can put hydrogen in. You can, without causing the emission of carbon, have energy dense energy be sent from countries that already produce energy. So all the infrastructure and so on can be cut over easily. And yeah, it sucks that it still requires coal mining, and in a way, it still is rewarding the same countries that have polluted from, have profited from polluting. And the whole issue of sequestering, even as well, you still are digging up coal and then putting it back in the ground, and all the disruption that happens from that. So, no, it's not a good long-term solution or even a medium-term solution. But I think if you look at climate change and the need for clean energy as an emergency, which it
And
is,
when you mentioned the $19 billion green fund, which would include trying to get hydrogen planes and carbon recycling. So, if you could change the airline industry and make it cleaner, that would be a game changer. I mean, now nobody wants to fly because of COVID, but definitely air travel is the way of the future. We just have to make it a bit cleaner, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is the thing. I mean, again, while the way that you get it, and right now, all the investment, all the billions of dollars being spent is on blue, which is just converting existing dirty infrastructure into cleaner. But it's not the green, which is really what everyone wants. But the blue hydrogen thing, yeah. But the point is, you can get dense fuel, which you can put into rockets, you can put it into planes, you can actually convert over pretty easily. And you can't do it anywhere right now because it's difficult to transport and extract and so on. But Japan might very well get there first. And I don't know, I'm all for someone else coming up with a better idea. And I really hope we move from blue to green hydrogen fast. But,
it's a great technology. Yeah, if they're still working on improving it, and yeah, go for it. I love this other article that you shared about Japan's government to run on 30% renewable power next year. So it's when you start with what you can control, the government changing first, that shows a real motivation to make real change, not just to say things. So that
I'm
was
really
impressive.
curious how they're going to do that. But absolutely. In Japan, definitely the government leads a lot of things. The way that they there's whole economies that flow down from the government, right? That basically imitate how the government operates. And if the government's going through, and they'll also cut through all the red tape that's stopping regular companies from getting renewable energy if they need to cut through it to get it themselves. So yeah, I think that's a huge thing. The only thing is that I think there are, like for wind and so on, there's installation limits on some of the tiny grids that Japan has that limit like highly populated areas like 5% and 10%. So I'm not sure if they're going to count like big hydro for that or what they're going to do to get the 30% number. But if they can figure out, microgeneration or solutions for that.
Battery storage. You had an article about Nissan using the LeafCars to help with the power grid in smaller areas, right? I mean, there's, people are starting to think a bit more creatively outside the box. This is what we need, right? We don't have the answers. We're searching. So
that makes huge sense in Japan as well. The idea that right now when you have earthquakes in Japan, one thing about Japan is the same size as New Zealand, but only 2% of the landmass of Japan is actually inhabited. Most of the landmass is so rugged, it's so mountainous and harsh and vertical, all of the slopes, that you have 120 million people crammed into a tiny area of space, mostly around the coast. And whenever there is an earthquake or a typhoon, what frequently happens if you're outside the big cities is these towns get entirely cut off and they can lose power. and they can lose road access for days and sometimes weeks. We had in Chiba last year. And yeah, and just to get them reconnected, it always has to be reconnected from the outside. So it makes total sense in a place like Japan that if you have electric cars, why not make it so that if your town is cut off, everybody can cut their cars, plug their cars in, and have their cars recharge the town, or keep the hospital, or whatever. The emergency application is a sort of a no-brainer. It's probably not as essential in other countries, but in Japan, it's great. It's just wonderful to see everyone coming up with these ideas at once lately, it seems.
And then it'll definitely be more popular if they have this cute mascot who is helping to publicize this new Nissan that you can use
They
to
have
power
another
the grid.
mascot? I might have missed
It looks like
I'm sure it's on the screen
of
right
course
now.
they have a mascot. They have a mascot for everything in Japan.
They do. I would like a home insulation mascot, and I want that one to be the cutest.
Oh yeah, the double glazed window mascot. That's what we need.
Yeah. I'll bet you 100 yen that there probably is one somewhere.
I've been trying to get in touch with Mondo Mascots, on Twitter. I would love to have him on the series. He introduces all the crazy mascots around Japan. You have to check him out on
I've seen
Twitter.
the feed.
Yeah,
Yes,
really fun.
yeah.
To switch gears a little bit, I just saw this. You mentioned in your talk last night talking about women and expats becoming foreign bosses. And then today I saw in the Mainichi about genderless school uniforms. And I think embracing gender issues in any way, it's always really exciting to see this happen in Japan. This is actually something that we went through last year because my daughter didn't feel comfortable wearing a skirt and the typical girl's uniform. And we went through talking to the principal and everything. And luckily we're at a very flexible school and she's allowed to wear the boys' uniform. And it's fine. And it's been very smooth transition. So it was really nice to see that this is becoming more of an accepted thing around Japan. Genderless uniforms spreading. Definitely an issue that it's kind of old-fashioned in Japan in a lot of schools, right?
It's such a big country, so I like to think when you hear the outrageous news stories that come up now and again, particularly of kids. I mean, there are some, they're not even half. Sometimes they're just regular Japanese people who happen to have curly hair or brown hair, and their schools force them to straighten it and to dye it, even when it's natural. It's almost always private schools that do that. Public schools, generally, Japan's moved on a little bit from that, but of course it's such a big country that there's a story that comes up every now and then like that. The uniforms thing, I must admit, as someone in New Zealand, in Auckland, all the public schools in central Auckland have just always been separate sex, or separate, I suppose now you'd say, no, sex, that's right, because gender can be lots of things, sex too, biological. So I went to an all-boys school for 5 years for high school, but now they have girls. I think they started accepting girls, and again, I always thought it was actually, it was weird that they had the separations. And to me, the idea, like, why do they have to wear a skirt? I mean, while again, I'm fully on board, although sometimes I have to pause and take a moment to get back up to speed. Okay, where are things now? What do I call? I have to use third person plural pronoun for everybody now. I can't say default. I have to be careful, but why not wear long pants and a shirt, which, to work or to school, like, and why should there be a uniform that designates an arbitrary difference like that? I'm okay with that. Yeah.
Wasn't it last year in a company, and a woman brought up she doesn't want to have to wear heels? Wasn't that in the news last year, right?
I saw another, that was Kutsu. I did a little bit of a tirade about that just because I thought that was used by media companies as a deflection from the Me Too discussion. All of a sudden, the Me Too discussion just disappeared and it became Kutu, which I don't deny is also, there's also an inconsistency and there's an issue there to be addressed. But I also thought, what happened to the Me Too discussion? This is just a cuter, easier discussion in a way for the media to talk about than that. But more recently, there was another thing. I saw something on one of the Japanese bookmark boards where people talking about if companies require women to wear makeup to work, then the company should pay for the makeup. I was like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. But quite often, I haven't noticed it recently, but quite often I would go to any kind of government office, and all the women were, I guess, forced to wear a kind of uniform.
Uniform,
And
yes.
is usually
I've
like
worked at companies like that.
a dress uniform, and all the men were allowed to wear whatever suit they wanted. So maybe if we start with the schools, and the schools can have genderless uniforms where boys and girls wear the same thing, why not? Everybody wears pants and shirt. Why not just make it same for everybody? And then
Absolutely.
maybe we'll see that change also in companies, or I don't know. It's a big change when it
Yeah.
happens in education in Japan, right?
Yeah, and that's where it starts from. And once you have people who have the expectation that there shouldn't be differentiation going in and going into companies and saying this is weird, yes, there's going to be a culture clash period that may go on for a period of time when that happens, but it's a positive change. I actually talked about last night how, yeah, the real focus in Japan on diversity, mainly on gender inclusion in leadership. It's overwhelmingly cis men, obviously. And I pointed out as someone who also, has a job in a company that tries to be aware about these things. It's hard when you suddenly realize, okay, quick, we've got to get, find me 10 senior women to fill roles in the company. We have the spots open, go find them. And when for the full 100 years until that point, there's been no path for them to get to the position where you would find those people and pick them from. And I experienced this working in a Japanese company like Tokyo Marine, an insurance company. What you're talking about, all the office women, yes, there were women who were not there was a category of employee, basically the office clerks, who are basically all women who all wear a uniform designating that they're office clerks. They're all women, and they wear a certain uniform. And then there are the career employees. Now, under those career employees, it wasn't a gender separation. There were women who were career employees, but it was like 1 in 100. And that was at the starting point. That was, let alone waiting 30 years to come out the other end to be eligible for a C-suite job, which some of them, miraculously get through and can do. But the reason that there's so few, and the idea, okay, every company now, Keidanren says we all have to have 10%, 30% women on the boards. I think they're setting a 30% goal. And but they've just structurally made the working place so that only 1% of women even get to a position to be selected. Suddenly setting your top leadership, yes, that is one way of having those targets. It forces you to look all the way down and figure out how to have uptake systems for that. But the problem's all the way down to the schools, I think, actually, is what you're talking about. Yeah,
I think there is a lot of eligible women to move up in the ranks, but what I heard from a lot of my university students, females, is that they didn't want to be promoted if they had to work like the men, because the men were expected to work until crazy hours, have no holiday, be transferred around the country. So unless the situation changes for both genders, it's going to be very hard to promote women, especially if women are mothers, or if the person, man or woman, has to take care of elderly people in the family, right? If you're a caregiver and you are expected to work crazy hours, not have holiday, be transferred around Japan, you're not going to want to be promoted, right?
Well, that's the other half of it. And this is why it was seen as momentous that Koizumi, the environmental minister, when he said and made a big parade out of taking his paternity leave, but only less than 4% of Japanese men take paternity leave that they're entitled to. And that, again, that's got deep seated culture things. I know so many people in international marriages where it's a Western man and a Japanese wife, and they have the Western expectation of childbirth where, they're going to be by the bed and they're going to be, they preparing to help out. And then they discover the wife says, okay, I'm going back to my hometown. I'll see you in 3 months' time, and they're left behind. And I know people have been sort of shocked by that. But so it's kind of both ways as well. There's so much to sort of shift. But again, it's like when you talk about having genderless uniforms, then it makes it, when you have those distinctions based on sex or gender identity later on, it kind of shines a light on how silly they are. And I think, they're both directions, right? It's both men normalizing and saying, why would I want to be away from my family for a year? I'm going to find a different job and having, being in a position to say that, which people haven't been, until now. and women as well, and companies realizing, well, if you want to have 3 senior managers who are women, you need to figure out how to make it so that they can work when they have children and not push them out like the structure does, even if it's not intentional. You got to have mechanisms to enable that. So it's starting. It's all a bit late, but I see the message getting through, but a long way to go.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, recently there was a discussion about having merit-based promotions, merit-based salary. This is something that happens in other countries. This is different in Japan, where it's usually based on age for seniority. So these kind of discussions, this is all really important to have discussions and to try to move forward in a way that works for your demographic at your company for your area, and think long view. Like, what kind of staff do we want? Of course, we want our staff to be happy and to have some kind of work-life balance, right?
What astounds me is actually that it hasn't happened more, not because it's late, but more because Japan, in the last 20 years, Japan has shifted dramatically. The job market in Japan has shifted so dramatically to being a seller's market. The competition, every job being advertised there's something like 2 jobs for every person looking for a job in some parts of Japan, pre-corona anyway, and assuming it'll go back to that. So you would think that the pressure to compete to attract employees included, well, one, to make available and make better use of women employees and not just pressuring them to quit as soon as they get married or whatever to retain them, because you're not going to be able to find a replacement for them, and the desire to attract people with attractive working conditions. But again, I think you've got a whole generation that culturally cannot even conceive of what's actually required to attract people, because everyone's so used before that to sacrificing everybody working for the companies, and the idea of needing to attract talent, they don't know how to do it. But in a way, it's baffling to me that companies can still not be flexible around that when it's so hard to find people now.
Yeah.
So it's got to happen. I mean, something's going to break. A lot of companies are going out of business because of this.
Yeah. I think because of coronavirus and the shift to online work and the shift to working from home has been better to include women in the workforce, right? Because then it is on what kind of quality of work that you're doing, not how many hours you spend at the office, right? So it's really, the whole coronavirus situation has shifted the whole workplace in Japan, probably more in Japan than other places, perhaps.
I think you're right.
I don't know.
And the last job that I worked at had, you could work at home up to 3 days a week. And I think that was really significant for, as tough as that job was, for women, it almost locked them in. They had them feel like they couldn't go anywhere else, almost in a bad way. But it was, it was because that gave them flexibility that they knew they wouldn't be able to get in any other job. And it's nice that that's, I think, going to become the default going forward. Yeah, it's going to definitely promote inclusion, I'm sure.
Yeah. It's interesting. We had a great discussion the other day with a husband and wife who both were in Tokyo, both had great career jobs, and they moved out to the rural areas, and now they're organic farming and running an organic eco lodge and stuff. I mean, it's a struggle. You're not having that monthly paycheck, but their quality of life and raising a family out there is so much better than what they had. And it was 3/11 that pushed them out, because they realized food insecurity, right?
Yeah.
So there might be a big shift during coronavirus, I think. We've had General Bumble Bumfire is making comments.
Hello, General.
Hello, General. And Phil Tester, I've had students say on the flip side, because they're at home teleworking, they can participate more in household chores and child raising. Hopefully that flexibility can continue. I agree. I think so. But the workplace has to continue being accepting of flexibility even after coronavirus. We hope after coronavirus, it's not just business as usual, shift back, right?
And I tend to look at every crisis as an opportunity, including climate change. But with this as well, I think Japan's demographic crisis, and it really is a crisis, it literally is change or die. I mean, that is the situation. And so while that is terrible and tragic there's a lot of companies going out of business, you survive by fixing that stuff. And it's a huge opportunity for the people that want to go out and set up businesses and run businesses that way. I think there's a huge benefit to be had from it. So I'm optimistic that it's good. It has to. How can it not connect with that? And I can see it happening. It's really cool. It's been a really cool period of time to be in Japan, actually, just to see everything happening like this. And it feels like we're doing it relatively, looking out at the rest of the world, it feels like we're just drama-free, doing a lot of this stuff quietly. That's what I like about Japan. They just get on and do stuff. I mean, not always. So there's a lot of frustration. But yeah, I think it's a very cool time to be here right now and see all this sort of change happening.
Yeah, and I was very skeptical when Prime Minister Suga first took office, because I, like many people, just assumed that he would just
Same old
be
LDP. Yeah.
carrying on Abe's things, that he wasn't really doing much. And he's actually been a real breath of fresh air, I have to say. I'm very impressed so far.
Yeah.
Fingers
So far,
crossed.
I mean, it's good. Good. Yeah. They need a breath of fresh air. Well, I definitely hope it sustains as well. So yeah, it's good signs.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, that is our hour. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
That
always.
was fun. That was a wonderful
Yeah.
discussion. Thank you, everybody, for joining. That was lots of fun. And we'll try to do it next month. Yeah?
Cool. Yes,
Once
indeed.
a month. Awesome. Tomorrow, if you're following Seeking Sustainability Live, tomorrow 9 a.m., I'm talking with Peter McIntosh. He is a geisha photographer in Kyoto. So he's going to talk about geisha culture. That should be interesting. Yeah,
Cool.
thanks so much, Hiko. Thanks for joining.
Yeah. Anytime. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night. Take care. Bye.